The Rebel Capitalist Show.
Now, let's go back to shareholder capitalism, because I want to go, you're obviously a PhD economist, and I want to go over the economics of shareholder capitalism and maybe try to play devil's advocate. And I remember actually Milton Friedman discussed this extensively in a few speeches that I've listened to on YouTube back in the 1970s. This idea that corporations should be more responsible, and they should invest in, in climate change or green energy, or they should do the bidding. They should do more, quote unquote, good instead of just having this profit motive. And Friedman broke that down, and he said, well, wait a minute. You've got to understand that corporations are just simply people. They aren't some abstract, alien entity. And you have to realize that shareholders are people. So basically Friedman, his argument was, well, what you're doing is you're saying you want that CEO to have more control over the profit stream from that corporation to do whatever it is he wants to do that's going to enrich him and give him more power and control, instead of taking that profit and having it go directly to the shareholders, the individuals, and then let them invest or let them give to any charity that they want to give to. So why should, what we're doing is we're saying that shareholder capitalism is this, is good and it's charitable, but all it's doing is saying we want the charity to be more centrally planned. And then that gives the power and the control to the CEO. And if Klaus is influencing the CEO, then by default, that gives him the power and the control. Excuse me, guys, I've got a tail end of a cold here. So what are your thoughts on that especially with your background as a PhD economist?
Sure. So right, you did a great job summarizing, and it occurred to me, I don't know that I've seen anyone do this, but maybe one way of just motivating Friedman's point to somebody who's skeptical, and I'm sure, George, your audience is not necessarily that group, but imagine if a company came out and said, hey, because we support whatever, the spotted owl, we're going to out of our employee, the money that we otherwise would owe our employees next month in terms of payroll, we're gonna reduce that by 1% and donate that to support the spotted owls. And you can imagine people would say, whoa, that's, who are you? If the workers want to go ahead and do that, then go ahead and pay them what you owe them, their wages and salaries. And then if you want to give them the information in case they're not aware of the plight of the spotted owl, you can go ahead and give them the information and then say to them, if you want to donate, go ahead. But to just take, their money in a sense and donate on their behalf in order to really make a difference, to help, coordinate things, a lot of people would understand that, no, that's not your decision to make. Just, you pay the workers what you owe them, let the workers, in their own weigh the pros and cons of various competing ends. It could be other philanthropic things and so forth. And so likewise, that's what it is with the shareholders, that the corporation, we have revenues, we have costs, we have this amount, we put this aside or whatever, and we have stuff that we're ready to distribute as dividends to the shareholders. And if instead of that, what if we take 1% and go donate it to support, malaria nets in Africa? Again, the logic is, well, wait a minute. Why is the corporate management making a decision based on money that otherwise would have gone to the shareholders? Just if you want the shareholders to effectively to have less, to free up more money for donations, then talk to them. Don't try to short circuit the process. So that's Friedman's argument. I suppose there's a little bit. So I think, in terms of the strict economics, everything I said is totally valid. And, that's what Friedman's basic argument was. There is something to be said, though, in terms of coordination problems or whatever. So my point is, even in a genuinely free society, I don't think it's wrong. For example, you go to a little league game and the kids' jerseys all have some company name on it, local Jimmy's Pizzeria supports this team or something. You know what I mean? You could get real anal and say, well, why is Jimmy's Pizzeria doing that? They should, and it's for advertising and goodwill. And, so there's things like that. So it's, my concern is if you push that analysis too far, it ends up sounding like the economists who say Christmas is inefficient. Because, you know what I mean? You should, at best, you should just give everybody checks and let them go buy what they want. And, and so you see how that kind of leaves something out. So there is something like that. But again, I think it's partly a matter of extremes. And certainly what is happening now with corporations posturing and trying to be good corporate citizens and that sort of thing, and BP calling itself Beyond Petroleum and all that. That's that's not a spontaneous outcome that I think that's akin to some local pizza shop supporting the little league team. That I think that is due to they're either trying to put it this way: when the state has all this power to make or destroy individual corporations, through merger approvals or onerous, tax treatment and whatnot, you kind of have to stay on their good side. And so there always is that big club there. And so again, with this stuff, I don't look at this as purely a voluntary outcome. And not to just say, oh, it's all these poor innocent corporations that are getting smacked around by the big bad government, big brother. It's kind of a two-way street where, like we said, a lot of these corporations are the ones sending their people to Davos and helping set this agenda. And so it's a kind of thing where the bigger players might set the agenda, and that kind of locks out the more middle of the road, or not middle of the road, but like mid-level companies who can't now compete.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're incentivized because we live in a world today where you got to think this through. If you're a mega corporation, let's say, you've got two ways to compete with everyone that's coming up and nipping at your heels. You could, in a world of big government, you can just use political pull and influence and ESG. I mean, ESG is a perfect example of that you can just influence the person that's giving you the rating or whatever politician. And then you get all of these benefits for having a high ESG score. And that limits the small guy's ability to compete with you. Or, Walmart arguing for a higher minimum wage is another example. Mm-hmm. This is not just corporations doing quote unquote good. This is them using government to build a moat and to build a monopoly. So if you're, even if you're someone on the far left, I think, and you want to reduce the size or reduce the power of these mega corporations, I think you first and foremost have to understand that we've got to reduce the size of government, because if government didn't have as much power and control, the corporations wouldn't be using them in the first place. And then Klaus, on top of that, he wouldn't have as much pull. And it just, the whole process goes in reverse. But if the governments get bigger and bigger and bigger, then the corporations are going to leverage them more and more and more. Then the governments are going to be incentivized to only to eliminate the small competitors, the mom and the pop, the mid-sized small businesses, because they can influence and they get the kickbacks from these huge mega corporations. And then Klaus is incentivized to have all of the means of production, let's say, more centralized with these governments and mega corporations, because he can influence 100 people a lot easier than he can influence millions of people.
Right, exactly. And another good example of that is like Exxon actually, originally supported, in terms of like, the donations they would give some of the organizations that now would be deemed as climate deniers. But then they switched, and they were all, they're for carbon tax and they're supporting all this stuff and whatever. And part of it is, I think they just made a judgment that, something's coming, we want to be at the table, not on the menu, that kind of phraseology. But, and they made a bunch of investments like in natural gas plays. And so, so they ran the nut and realized, okay, that, because with a modest sized carbon tax, for, in case your listeners don't know, that right now for the foreseeable future, a modest sized carbon tax actually would help like natural gas, because it would kill coal. But then, wind and solar can't fill the gap right now, just for various practical reasons. And so that would really expand, the use of natural gas for electricity production. So somebody who was heavily into natural gas versus some of their competitors might favor a carbon tax, just for purely profitable reasons to justify their investments. So, there's lots of things like that. And again, with this ESG, and just real quickly, I saw someone come and give a talk when I was still at Texas Tech about, how the Chinese system works with the social credit rating scores. And what was interesting, so it was the kind of thing where, if you made a Facebook post or, something online critical of the Chinese government, your score would get dinged. And then the ramifications, it's not necessarily for something that was relatively trivial. that agents of the state would come in the middle of the night and disappear you. It's just you might not be able to ever rent a hotel room now, or at least, for your punishment period while you sat in the corner and thought about what you did. And so then that raised the question, though, well, wait a minute, why does the hotel care? And then they were saying it was kind of like a credit score, like how in a sense that's like a voluntary, market-based thing. Like your credit score, it's not that the government tells you what your credit score is. Those are just groups who give opinions, and they can't, the group that's rating your credit score here in the West, it's not that they say to a lender, we'll shoot you if you lend money to this person. They're just saying, no, this is our opinion as to what his credit score is. Do what you want. And then, that has ramifications. So I asked the presenter, well, wait a minute, why does the hotel care? If you're a hotel in China and someone comes to rent a room, why, and you look up on the database and say, oh, you got dinged last month because you said something negative about the Communist Party. So no, you can't stay here. Like, why do they care? That, your views on the Communist Party presumably don't have much to do with whether you're going to, trash the hotel room. And then the answer, of course, was, because that itself is one of the ratings. If you are a business and you do business with clients or with customers who got dinged, then you get dinged. So it was sort of like a hierarchy of ratings. So it was weird, like to figure out where does the actual state coercion come in. It was like several layers removed. Like a lot of it was just this quasi-voluntary rating system of like, private sector punishment or ostracism. And
so we see that with, do you know who Mark Andreessen is?
I know the name.
Yeah. He's the gentleman that I believe he built Netscape, one of the first web browsers back in I believe it was the early 90s. And now he's a big a VC guy in Silicon Valley. But he came out with this theory that I heard that in society today, we have to have something to be hysterical about. And we can't look at whatever the current hysteria is. We can't look at it through the lens of critical thinking until we've moved on to the next hysteria. So he used the example of COVID, where you've got this massive hysteria and people just cannot think about it without using just complete emotion and being whipped up in this emotional frenzy. But he says now that this hysteria has moved on to, let's say, Russia, Ukraine, all of a sudden we can look back in retrospect and be very, quote unquote, scientific about the actual facts in the data. And I thought that was, a fascinating hypothesis. But then, you understand that. And if that's true, then you look at it through the lens of what you're just saying, where the government almost doesn't need to set up this social credit score. We thrust it upon ourselves because society is at a point where they're just looking for the next thing to be hysterical about. And I think about all the companies and the corporations that really stopped doing business in Russia. Or you think about all these bars that are no longer carrying Smirnoff vodka when the owner of Smirnoff is actually a UK company. It has nothing to do with Russia whatsoever. And it's like they are, they are censoring themselves, because if they don't, then society will be outraged, this outrage culture. So it sounds similar to what you're saying there, that, even though we might not have that specifically or explicitly in the United States, kind of in an indirect way, we do.